The little girl hadn't spoken a single word in 6 months. Not to her mother, not to her doctors, not to anyone. Then one day, a 200-pound Bullmastiff walked through her front door, and that night, her mother heard something from the hallway that stopped her heart completely. "Rosie, honey, come away from him." Claire's voice was steady, but her hands were shaking. Bear stood in the center of the living room, 200 pounds of golden brown muscle, a head the size of a basketball, wrinkled face, deep-set eyes, and a jaw powerful enough to crush bone. Claire stopped that thought before it could finish. All that mattered was Rosie. But Rosie wasn't listening. She never listened anymore. She stood just 3 feet away from Bear, her tiny hands hanging at her sides, staring up at him with those wide, silent eyes. Bear stared back. Neither of them moved. "Please," Claire whispered, "please come here." Rosie took one small step forward. Claire's heart stopped. Bear slowly lowered his massive head until his wrinkled face was level with Rosie's. Then Rosie reached out both arms and hugged him. Claire couldn't breathe. She stood frozen, one hand pressed over her mouth, watching her daughter wrap her arms around this enormous animal. Bear didn't move, didn't flinch. He simply held perfectly still, as if he understood exactly what this moment meant. Because that was the first time in 6 months her daughter had reached for anything. 6 months earlier, Claire's life had been completely different. Tom was still alive. Rosie was loud, gloriously, endlessly, exhaustingly loud. She sang in the car, talked to her stuffed animals, and asked why about 400 times a day. "Why is the sky blue, Daddy? Why do dogs have tails, Mommy? Why? Why?" Tom would catch Claire's eye over Rosie's head and smile, that special smile that said, "Isn't she something?" She was everything. Then came that Tuesday in October, a wet road, a red light, and a truck that didn't stop. Tom died on impact. The doctors said Rosie was physically unharmed, no broken bones, no head injury, but from that night on, Rosie never spoke again. Not in the hospital, not at the funeral where she sat silently on Claire's lap, staring at the coffin, and not once in the 6 long months that followed. The pediatrician called it selective mutism, possibly caused by trauma. Claire simply called it the worst sound she had ever heard, silence where her daughter used to be. Bear had been Tom's dog. In the terrible days after the accident, Claire had completely forgotten about him. Tom's brother had taken him that night. 3 months later, he called. "Claire, I'm sorry. My landlord won't allow him. I've tried everything." She almost said no. A 200-pound dog in the house with her traumatized 4-year-old felt like too much. But then she remembered how Tom had picked Bear as a puppy, how he'd trained him himself, and how every single night at bedtime he would tell Rosie stories about him. "Bear is going to be your best friend," Tom used to say. "Just you wait." Every night he would sit on the edge of Rosie's bed and tell her real stories about Bear, how he once stole Tom's sandwich and looked completely innocent. Rosie would giggle with her whole body. "Will Bear sleep on my feet too, Daddy?" "Probably your whole body. He doesn't understand how big he is." Rosie would laugh again. "Silly Bear." "Silly Bear," Tom would agree, kiss her forehead, and turn off the light. Those were the last words Rosie ever spoke to her father. "Silly Bear." Claire closed her eyes. "Bring him tomorrow," she said quietly. Bear arrived on a Thursday morning. The moment he walked through the front door, he stopped and slowly looked around the room. Then he saw Rosie standing in the hallway in her pink pajamas, watching him. Bear went completely still. Something passed across his face that Claire couldn't name. He walked over to her slowly and sat down right in front of her, looking at her gently. Rosie looked back. Neither made a sound. For the first time in 6 months, Claire felt something stir inside her chest. She didn't know what it was, but she knew it wasn't nothing. The first week, Bear followed Rosie everywhere, always 3 feet behind, never pushy, just There. When she sat on the floor, he sat close enough for her to feel his warmth. Rosie never spoke to him, but she stopped flinching when he moved. She even started saving pieces of her toast and dropping them beside his bowl. Claire watched all this quietly from doorways and corners, afraid to disturb whatever was happening between them. 3 weeks later, Dr. Sarah Mills sat across from Claire and said honestly, "Rosie's case is complex. The trauma was severe. Progress is possible, but it will be slow. She needs to find someone or something she feels completely safe with."
That evening, when Claire came home, she found Bear lying in the hallway outside Rosie's room, his huge body blocking the entire corridor. Rosie was curled up beside him, her small hand resting on his back, eyes closed, resting peacefully. Claire stood there for a long time, then went to the kitchen and cried. That night at 2 a.m., Claire found herself sitting on the floor beside Bear outside Rosie's door. "Take care of her," she whispered. Bear's tail thumped once, slow and steady, like a promise. The following night was different. Claire lay in the dark, listening to the quiet house. Then she heard it, a tiny voice, Rosie's voice. Her heart started hammering. She quietly got out of bed and opened the door. There, in the soft glow of the nightlight, Rosie was sitting between Bear's front legs, her back against his massive chest, looking up at his wrinkled face, and talking. After 6 months of silence, her daughter was finally talking. Claire pressed herself against the wall, not daring to move or make a sound. "I saw the truck, Bear," Rosie whispered. "Daddy didn't see it, but I saw it." Claire's hand flew to her mouth. Then Rosie's small fingers found Bear's collar. "Bear, this is Daddy's." She pressed the collar against her cheek. "He's still here, isn't he, Bear?" Bear gently lowered his massive head and rested it on top of Rosie's, staying there like he was holding her together. The next morning, Rosie sat at the breakfast table and looked straight at Claire, really looked at her for the first time in 6 months. "Mommy," she said, her voice small and rusty. Claire's eyes filled with tears. "Daddy told Bear to find me." Claire could barely speak. "Really?" Rosie nodded with complete certainty, the kind only children have. Claire's hand reached across the table and held her daughter's hand tightly. Bear's tail thumped once against the floor, slow and steady, like a heartbeat. Did this story touch your heart? Then think of that special animal who stayed when everyone else left, the one who knew something was wrong before you did, the one who never stopped trying to help you heal. Write their name in the comments below. Let the world know their name. They deserve it. If this story moved you, please like this video and subscribe. It means everything to us. Thank you for being here today with us. See you in the next video. Have a beautiful day.